Hey everyone, it's Joe. Welcome to another episode of the Future Business Analyst podcast. My guest today is the mighty Adrian Reed, Principal Consultant at Blackmetric, Editor-in-Chief at BA Digest, and as we all know, Adrian likes a good side project. He's also co-founder of BASchool.day along with Tina Lovelock. Author, speaker, but mainly a BA. And co-workers would describe him as an unapologetic diva. He jokes, but only slightly. Only slightly, Adrian. At least you didn't insist on a bowl of blue M&Ms for coming on this show, so I appreciate that.
It would be brown M&Ms, Joe. You should know. It's
okay. Well, anyway, welcome to the show, Adrian. Thanks for joining me today.
No, thank you. My pleasure to be here.
We always start at the beginning. Why don't you tell us how you found this profession, or perhaps how it found you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm one of those BAs, Joe, and this may resonate with you, where I think business analysis found me, and I was actually working in an insurance company, and I was pretty much on an underwriting career path.
Ooh.
But I was always the sort of person that looked to try and improve processes. I was very junior in my career, and I sort of got into what was then called e-commerce. Not the kind of e-commerce we would consider to be e-commerce now, but it was, brokers, insurance agents sending electronic messages over with these horrendous data standards that were used at the time. And so I sort of got into projects on that and got into what we would probably now call IT systems analysis. And then as I started to get involved in change to IT systems, I started to understand the importance of the business and the process element of the change. And then the organization had a restructure, and suddenly there was this role called business analyst. And the more I found out about it, the more I was like, okay, well, hang on a minute. This is what I've been doing, and this is what I enjoy doing, and this is what I want to do. And then once I knew that, it was like a light bulb came on for me. And I then subsequently, did some actual training in business analysis because I knew it was an actual role, and then moved on, to a different company to become lead business analyst, and and so on and so forth. So went through various domains. So it found me, I think.
Yeah, and as you say, it is a story that resonates. I think it does find many of us where we start, if we've got a mind for that improvement, we start seeing things that we can change, and then suddenly there's a role for us, right? Yours emerging sort of quite early on, I guess, in the maturity of the profession. How have you seen things change over the years from when you first started to now?
So I think, so I'll start by answering that question in a really odd way. One thing that hasn't changed is I think there's a sense that business analysis isn't as recognised as it should or could be. And when I was first involved in this, there was we were always fighting up against but you're part of IT, right?
Yeah.
And organisationally, in that organisation, we were part of IT, and we were really struggling to say, actually, look, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to make all of your decisions about solutions and only involve us when you think there's IT involved, because actually we provide bigger services there, and that was a battle we were fighting at the time. But I think there's that misunderstanding in some organisations is still there. It isn't in others, but I think there is still a feeling amongst many practitioners that people almost like people don't get us.
Yeah.
And I think there's work for all of us in the community to do to sort of collectively get over that, which perhaps we'll come on to as a separate topic. But in terms of what's changed, I think, in terms of the fundamental skills beneath it all are still really sound, because you need to be able to problem solve, you need to be able to understand processes, you need to understand data, things like this. But of course, the actual mechanisms, the deliverables, the artifacts, the way they look have definitely changed. I'm far more likely, if I think about the projects I've worked on in recent years, it's far more likely to be buy rather than build. That might just be because of the types of clients I tend to work with. Whereas, in my like in the first part of my career, it was on making changes to an existing, what we would now call legacy mainframe. I mean, it was probably legacy at the time, to be honest, but it was homegrown. Whereas there's sort of less of that. But then there's the recognition that organisations have normally got a bit of a hodgepodge of technical architecture and process architecture and organisational architecture. So you find yourself having to understand all of that. So I think obviously there's more agile practices to a greater or lesser extent. I see a lot of agile in name only, which again is a whole separate topic. But there's I think what underpins all of this is an expectation that the pace of change has to be quicker.
Yeah.
And often people say, or I find people say, oh, well, we want to be agile. What they actually mean is we need the ability to realize benefits quicker and get stuff out the door quicker, of which some agile methods may help us achieve that, may help us achieve a part of that. So I think that's an element to it. And, and I think, but a real biggest two related things that have changed: the cadence, speed, velocity, and veracity of communication is just so much like when and this is where I'm going to sound like so I'm going to say, like, I used to live in a windmill or something. It's that kind of crazy sort of. But like when I first started my career, I was in an insurance broker, and our main communication with the insurance companies we dealt with were by phone or by memo, right?
Yeah.
Printed memo, which if it was urgent would get faxed, right?
Yeah.
And so things happened in quite a batchy way, because you had an end of day batch that got physically mailed. That kind of cadence just doesn't cut it today. But the flip side of that is, I think we work in a permanently distracted world where everyone's at meetings, and everyone's at meetings replying to Teams messages and WhatsApps. And so if I was reading, and in fact it's just happens to be here because I was making some notes on it, but an excellent book by Petra Velzebor, Begin With You, which is actually about mental health and cultures in organisations. But I haven't got the exact quote. I won't be able to find it. But she basically says that focus is the new competitive commodity, right? Like nobody has focus. And I was reading it thinking, I work in a distracted way, and actually just carving out time to think. So I've gone on a really rambling stream of consciousness there, Joe. So pick the bones out of that.
Yeah, well, I guess that's my part of this conversation, to try and do that. And you did drop lots in there, but it is really interesting how things have changed, and there's no one simple answer, is there? It's the many sort of different complexities that you brought in. I mean, let's maybe focus on that word focus, because I do think it's very important. You talk about these times when it was when communication was much slower. I was remembering back to when there was a mailroom guy. You had a trolley, and you put your memos on that trolley, and you might be lucky if it reached the floor above or below by the next morning, right? It was a completely different pace. And now, as you identify, just the pace of change, the pace of expectations, the pace of meeting needs is, what was the word you? I think you used the word ferocious, didn't you? Because it is ferocious, and that ferocity is probably only going to increase as we get into the next few years. How do you think, as well, I don't even want to say as BAs, I think just as general professionals, just as people, what sort of tactics are you starting to put in place to be able to cope with that?
So I think there's two elements to that. There's the almost like it's cutting out the. This is a sort of probably a physicist's view. Not that I'm a particularly good physicist, but it's cutting out the signal from the noise for me personally. Okay. And I think that applies at different levels. It sits at the organisational level, a team level, and an individual level. So, like, I mean, you and I have never directly worked together, but we've collaborated on stuff together, and you know me well enough to know if you send me a WhatsApp message, I will reply to it, but probably not straight away. And there's nothing, and that's just
Yeah.
that's unless it's urgent, that's kind of fine. So I think there's an element of understanding the signals that actually need an urgent response, and understand the signals that might be somebody else's crisis, but making a decision over whether to make it your crisis or not as well. And that's going to sound really harsh, but like, you can end up, if you're working on a business critical product, a business critical, if this thing doesn't launch, we're not going to be compliant at the end of the month or whatever, and someone draws you out to work on something that is far less important, then you've potentially, you've helped them with their crisis and created a crisis of your own, sort of thing. It's really easy to do. But I think more broadly than that, and I'm going to bring it back to BA techniques because I can't help myself. But if you think about a context diagram, and I know that's one of those things, you say context diagrams, there are so many different flavors, but just imagine a circle with some boxes around and some arrows coming in, those arrows representing data flows. You could almost imagine them like message flows. A business event's happened and some adjacent system or adjacent actor is telling you something, and your bit in the middle has to decide whether or how to respond. And that kind of thinking can apply at an individual level, right? Okay, someone sent me an email saying, they want me to review the eBay purchase that I've made. I may or may not actually want to do that, right? Just because it's come in doesn't mean that I'm going to do it or I'm going to do it now. Organizations need to do that as well. Someone sent in a suggestion. They think you should do something completely differently. Of course, listen to it, but triage it. And if it's not in line with your strategy, probably just write back and say, thank you very much for the feedback, but, we're a discount airline. No, we're not going to offer free food to all of our passengers or whatever. I mean, that's a crazy example. So, I think it's about triaging, understanding that there's going to be noise, prioritizing, and setting those boundaries. And unfortunately, and even on a personal level, saying no to stuff, right? Because there's so much stuff we all could do. And oh my word, I got stuck in an Instagram hole yesterday. I was scrolling. I was thinking, well, I'm just, caught in a scroll hole. I mean, it's easy to do.
Yeah. No, it is easy to be distracted. I like what you say about signals and reading signals. And I think it's aligning signals with other people. And I feel like you said this, but I'm reminded of a sign that somebody had on their desk once. They were an analyst programmer, place I worked 15 years ago. That sign on their desk said, bad planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. And I feel like that's the crux of what you're saying here in a way.
It is. And I think I've heard that and I like it. And I think that's the essence of it, but with empathy, because that's, and I'm not saying that statement doesn't have empathy, but there may well be people that we can help, we just can't help them immediately. Or it's a case of, well, actually, do you know what, I just can't because I'm working on this, but do you know what, actually there's a junior BA who's really trying to get experience in this, and they can't do exactly what you need, but do you know what, if you two work together, they've got some capacity. So hooking people up in that way. So I think it is, sometimes a yes and can be a good response to those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's maybe saying, not saying no, as you said, but saying, no, I can't, but I can help you in another way, and making that connection for somebody. And of course, those signals, as much as it might be bad planning on that other person's part, doesn't mean that it's not important, and it actually doesn't need your response, and that's just the way it has to be at that time.
And the thing is, we never really know what pressure that person was put under when they were planning, and what politics was going on, and we don't know what position they're in. So I think the essence of that statement, I think it's spot on. But I think if we wrap it in an empathetic wrapper, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe let's go with the flow of this, empathy, because I think empathy is going to be hugely important, isn't it, as we go forward? Because as you say, with the pace, with the ferociousness of it all, we're going to find ourselves in that situation more and more. So empathy is going to be
completely.
a big tool to help other people.
Well, and this is where, I'm gonna probably, I try not to be controversial, Joe. I really do. But so Lean Six Sigma are excellent process improvement methods and methodologies. So nothing I'm about to say is intended as a dig at any methodology. I think they're both fantastic and have their uses. It is easy when some process methodologies are misapplied, in my view, to end up cutting out all of the slack, creating so much standardization that when someone who has a need that doesn't fit the script, they're an edge case and they're excluded, right? And it reminds me of, I remember when I was a kid having I don't know how you describe it, but like a bucket. And the bucket had like a lid with different shapes on, right? So, and you had these little blocks. You'd have a star block that fit through the star hole, and you know the kind of thing I'm talking about, like a round hole, and then you could jam them in like I would do because I'm awkward like that. But anyway, more sensible children would have done it the right way, I'm sure. But the point is that I think a lot of when there's no slack, what the interface that we present to our customers, whether that's over the phone, whether it's an online interface, is right. Okay, is your query a square, a star, or a circle? And you go, no. Well, it has to be. So, and so I've had this experience. I have a elderly relative who very, very sadly lost mental capacity through dementia. Absolutely traumatic. Anyone going through that, it's a horrible journey for everyone around them. And in the UK, the way that happens is the person in advance makes what's known as a lasting power of attorney, which means that someone else can take on their affairs when they can no longer do so. And there are hundreds of thousands of power of attorneys, probably more, but every company you deal with, it's like, oh God, we've never seen one of these before. Oh, we don't know. Right. Well, and you end up having to, like, for one government department, I had to go to their director general to get stuff sorted. I kid you not. And for one telecommunications company, I had to basically take them to the regulator because they were refusing to deal under power of attorney. And you kind of go, I get why this is happening, though. It's because the people on the front line are saying, well, no, we only deal with the person. If you're not them, then sorry, we can't help you. It's like, well, okay. And then you get the really unempathetic responses. Well, can't you just ask him to remember his password and give it to you? Well, no, because actually he can't remember who anyone is and he can't speak. And so that's where you kind of lose the empathy, because the empathy is squashed out through too much unthinking automation. And automation isn't bad, but unthinking automation is. And unthinking systemization, like scripting, right? I don't necessarily mean IT system, but giving someone a script and saying don't deviate from it. So 100% ethics and empathy, so important.
Ethics and it is. And I'm going to circle back to your comment on the edges. And I'm thinking of I'm also doing the thing where I revert to business analysis, but I'm thinking of a process diagram, and we've got an exception, and maybe the exception doesn't have a flow apart from to say, give to a department that can deal with the unusual and be empathetic.
Exactly. And that's it, right? Because, and this is it, because sometimes when I talk about things like this, people say, oh, but you can't ever define processes for all the exceptions. And I say, yes, I agree. You can't, or you could, but it would take you so much time. And, a crazy example I always use is, would you know what? If the head of state rang and, said they want something, you might cut them some slack given their head of state, right? The president or king or queen or whatever in your jurisdiction. You're probably going to have a different process for them. But don't define that unless you know unless you know they're a customer, right?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, there's an ethical question about whether the process should or shouldn't be different, but you might need extra security because, you've got the king or president or whatever visiting. So, but yeah, I agree. That's, for uncommon exceptions, all you need is you need people to have the ability to see, oh my word, something else is different here. It isn't right for us to exclude that person or fob them off. Let's, someone who's got some autonomy to make the decision, let's pass it on to them.
Yeah, and to come back, sort of to circle around. I mean, you mentioned agile and agility at the beginning. Now you've now mentioned, I guess, following processes that choke particular situations. Agile is a means to agility, right? But it's not the end result, is it? It's just
Correct.
a path to get there.
Well,
Or one
yes,
path to get there.
yeah, it's part. In my view, agile product or software delivery methods are a part of a whole series of things that needs to happen in an organization to create agility, right? So, again, this is a ridiculous example, but only because I was, as I was mentioning earlier before we went live, I had my optician's appointment today. My eyes haven't changed, which is good. But one of the things I noticed on my walk to the opticians is in Portsmouth we have lots of these electric scooters. I don't know. Do you have them?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, right. And they're in a really weird legislative situation in the UK because it is legal to make them, it is legal to sell them, but it is not legal to use them on any public piece of land, right, or highway, because from what I gather, they fall into this weird classification of vehicle that you can use legally as long as you get vehicle excise license, vehicle excise duty, or road tax as it's sometimes known, and insurance. The issue being that you can't actually get either of those things, and there are other reasons that it doesn't fit into the Road Traffic Act or whatever, right? So you've got this bizarre situation where you've got a thing being sold that is definitely being used on public land, that is not legal, and the police probably haven't got the time or inclination to enforce against anyway. And then there are side schemes where you can legally rent them and stuff, and it's very blurry. But the point there is that's an example. I know it's a crazy example, but technology has moved more quickly than the law. Right?
Yeah.
The government cannot legislate, and there's not enough legislative time in the UK Parliament, I would suggest, to legislate as quickly for the technology that's emerging. Okay, now think about legislative agility, right? Writing legislation so it can actually be, quickly adapted for emerging technology. That's something I'm sure the senior civil servants in governments will be thinking about. That's necessary for agility in those organizations, but has nothing to do with agile, right?
Yeah.
But there's exactly the same thing in organizations at like policy and strategy level. Because like going back to that crazy bucket analogy with all the different stuff, right? Imagine those are the shapes, like those are the things that are out there in that bucket's environment. And if there's a shape that doesn't fit, the bucket can't really service its environment anymore, right? It's like an organization. Something happens, perhaps there's a new social trend, right? And it can't, if it doesn't see it, it can't respond to it. So it doesn't even know the signal. The signal is there knocking against the thing. And so I think agility, like agile is a great way of delivering, working software in a really effective way when it's done well. But there's a whole organizational thing that needs to change, where the organization needs to be looking outwards, needs to actually be talking to its customers. It needs to be, actually living agility at a macro perspective, not just saying, well, yeah, we want to deliver stuff quickly, but you know what? We also want you to commit to estimates, budgets, and we've got here's our 10-year strategic plan. Can you give us a 5-year roadmap, please? So there's that kind of level as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, you raised some great points. As much as like one area is being sort of encouraged to be more flexible, more agile, more fluid, there does reach this point where it starts to knock against the bucket and say, well, actually, we're sort of unable to do this. I'm joining a few dots here, I think. I want to come back to what you made a brief comment about, sort of people not understanding what the BA does, and perhaps being a problem from the outset of the role. I'm going to use one of your phrases here just to lead you into this. You say you try and avoid to be controversial. I think some controversy might be good, Adrian. BA's losing the learned helplessness. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to tie this into what I'm hearing from you is that BAs can step up and actually play a much bigger role in questioning things like ethics, in questioning things like, your shape sorter, and perhaps just driving change a little more proactively than they do right now?
I think there is a huge opportunity for anyone who has the appetite to do that. And I think there's actually a risk. So, and again, this may be controversial, but, I've seen situations before where BAs have been brought in too late. It happens, right? We've all been there. And almost like the situation is, right, you're brought in, we're agile, so the devs haven't got any user stories. So write user stories. Write as many user stories as you can. Oh no, don't ask those questions. Just write. Look, we just need user stories. And it becomes like a user story factory where it's like, no, just write stories. It's like this industrial complex of so that but actually in that situation, sometimes the most courageous, difficult but courageous thing to do is say, okay, let's put some seed stories in, but I'm going to start at quite a high level to work out. But let's actually work out what we're building here and whether it's the right thing. Because otherwise, I can write some really, really effective stories that deliver precisely zero value. Because, and by the way, what are we doing about non-functional requirements here? Has anyone considered those? Because are we really going to do them as stories? Maybe we are. Probably not, though. We're probably going to do them differently. And how are we just using? So I think there is this. Quite often, we get into a situation where others are, and it comes back to that crisis on other people's, someone else's crisis. Well, the outsourced dev team are telling us they can't do anything because they haven't got stories, and there's probably a whole other, So I think sometimes saying, yeah, we can do that, but alongside that, I'm going to help you understand the problem statement. I'm going to do a context diagram or whatever, and I want to, and in 2 weeks, let's have a checkpoint and just see where we're at and see if we're going along the right way. Because do you know what? Agile and agility is also about having the ability to pivot. So, let's not start and just by asking what everyone wants and coming up with a Santa's wish list of, inconceivable and incoherent requirements or stories. Let's actually figure out some of the really big questions as well. So, yeah, but circling back to the learned helplessness, and I really hope this isn't controversial, but if people don't get the value of what we do, that's on us.
Yeah.
It's a harsh truth. It took me a long time to learn, but I felt like I was being a teenager. Oh, nobody understands me. These people nobody gets me. I was one step away from, dressing like what's his face from The Cure and getting that's a reference that no one will get anyway. So except me and you, Joe. So I was getting my nail varnish ready, but but feeling misunderstood. But actually, if we cannot articulate our value, then we don't deserve a place at the table. And I know that's a horrible thing to hear and to say, but it's not a new role. If we can't explain it and if we can't sell it, then the problem is at least partially on us. I'm gonna give that caveat to anyone who's now going to write to me with hatred.
No, misunderstood teenager, I think, is the perfect analogy for it, because it's sort of this blaming the outside world for the situation that we're in, when actually we need to do a better job of articulating, but also demonstrating, I guess, not just saying, but acting and showing that, there is a valuable place for this stuff.
I mean, a phrase that I heard from Laura Brandenburg probably 15 years or more ago was credibility comes through delivery. And it has stuck with me ever since. And I've used it myself. Credibility comes through delivery. It might have been Laura Brandenburg. It might have been Paula Bell, actually. I might have heard either of them or both of them say that at some point, but very inspirational people, folks listening, Laura Brandenburg, Paula Bell, look them up, connect with them, awesome people. And I think there's a huge amount to that. But, I think that, and I think, again, this is one of those things that is at a practitioner level. It is also at a team or department or internal community of practice level, but also, we have a global virtual community of practice. You and I have never worked together for the same organization, but we know we can pick up the phone to each other. And if it's like, oh, Joe, you've worked on such and such. Can you give me some tips? I know you'd take the call, and vice versa. I would take the call. And that's a community of practice that spans beyond an organization. And I think by doing the sort of thing that you're doing here, Joe, with podcasts and the other great content you create, this is about getting the message out as well to each other. But hopefully then it filters, it proliferates through beyond business analysis as well. So I think there's that, the community of practice element to it as well.
There is, and I'm going to come back to that, but via something else. I was in training the other day, and somebody gave me a great analogy for what they see happening with business analysis and some of the other roles that are emerging more recently. They described it as a shiny red apple. And they said that BAs used to have a shiny red apple, and then somebody came along and took a bite out of it, right? And said, we'll handle that. You could call them a product manager or whatever you want. Imagine any role here. But then somebody else came along and said, we're going to take a bite of this apple too. And it was maybe a user research analyst. And, there's all these different sort of niche professions emerging. Do you see that continuing over the next while, becoming even more defragmented?
Yes, but I don't think it matters, because and this is another, and this. So it's really interesting, because the work I do with the clients I work with, quite often people will say, "Oh, what you do is business architecture, isn't it?" And maybe some of it is, or okay, what you do there is product management. Okay, fine, but then actually, I think it's the opportunity is, or to borrow that analogy, is rather than just having a red apple, is let's have a whole cocktail. Let's actually, I'll bring this is. I'll bring my apple. You bring your orange and your pear. Let's put them in a bowl and have a piece each, and then we've all got more flavors. And yeah, I might still be 70% apple. And if you've got a question about apple cider, you come and speak to me. But actually, I can do enough orange and enough pear. But knowing that the experts in pears, and this is analogies, I've stretched it too far, Joe. I'm flogging it, but you get the point. It's about, I think, Nick DeVoyle, who again, another hugely inspirational person. That if you're listening, follow Nick DeVoyle. He says things that I generally only see the significance of about 10 years later, and this was probably nearly 15 or 20 years ago now at an IIBA event. I remember him saying that, sometimes people say, well, you can't be a BA and do X as well. And my response is, why not? The boundaries are only there because we made them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that again. The boundaries are only there because we believe in them. And because it's organizationally convenient for the boundaries to be there.
Yeah.
And yes, there's got to be clarity around roles and races and these sorts of things, but they don't have to be concrete. They can be, knowledge can, and in my view should. It's really exciting, I find it, when knowledge comes from adjacent roles. When I work with UX professionals, I learn loads.
Mm.
because there's similarities in what we do, and I'd like to think they learn maybe something as well. When I've worked with other other disciplines, I've learned loads. So I think it's more about saying, yeah, do you know what? People might have a bite out of our fruit, but actually it's two-way, and why not take the opportunity to take a bite out of their world, and do it collaboratively and make it non-zero sum. It would be my view on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great view. Yeah, the fruit cocktail. One of the important things for me in there was actually saying, I can do a bit of pear, but I'm not a pear,
Exactly.
and that's the point where I can help you, but if you want more help, then we might need to take you to see a specialist, who really can
That's
get
it.
into it.
And that's it. And like, so for example, I know that I know there is so much I don't know about quality assurance and testing, like QA and testing, and there are people who specialize in
Yeah,
that. So whenever anyone asks me about that, I'll say, look, I can give you a very, very brief and probably an accurate overview of some stuff. You need a QA and testing professional here. It's not so one, it's not
yeah,
something I know about, and it's not something that excites me. But luckily, it's something that excites a whole bunch of
yeah,
people who I love working with. I love working with QA and testing professionals, and and I can, and in that situation, why I can perhaps introduce you to someone. So there's that element of knowing when to hand off and
yeah,
knowing when to recommend or bring in, and that works both ways, right? Because you then find that perhaps someone's speaking to a QA and testing professional and say, "Oh, do you know what? I can give you a bit about business analysis, but go and speak to Joe, right? Like, we
yeah,
really need to bring Joe in on this." So it's that kind of collaborative constellation of people that get stuff done, right?
yeah.
The disciplines that get stuff done, all collaborating to get stuff done and making sure when they see someone's not there, it's like, oh, shouldn't we have some, enterprise architecture here? Seems a bit lacking, that type of thing.
Yeah, you make a great point in there. It comes back to you, doesn't it? It's like you refer one way, but it's not one way. It goes both ways. And so, as you say, we built up that collaboration. And I'm reminded as well, one thing I often say when you do find a sort of a learned helpless BA is that you think you've got it bad. You should try being a tester. They get involved much later. They are given
Totally.
much less focus, and they get on with it and do it within the constraints that they've got.
Yeah, and I mean, I have huge amounts of respect for QA and testing professionals, because one of the things I think they're, in my experience, very good at is saying, okay, you've given us, you've dealt us these cards. Here's the tacit risk you're now,
Yeah,
here's the tacit risk you are now taking if we can only have that length of time to do what we need to do. So, what do you want to
yeah,
do? Informed, and I think that's another important point is I've never got, like, well, I do have an issue because, as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm known as a bit of a diva. But like, I don't have an issue with an informed decision maker saying you've got less time to do your analysis, as long as I have put forward the case
yeah,
that if you cut down to this, here are your risks. Here's what's going to happen.
yeah,
Here is the organisational debt you're going to be carrying if we do this. You're fine with that, okay? Well, do you know what? It's your budget. You're commissioning this piece
yeah,
of work. Fine. And that sometimes is life, sadly.
yeah,
But it is about that storytelling, and I normally find if you tell the story well enough,
yeah.
you can win them round, but not always.
Yeah, and yeah, it's going beyond just go, oh, well, I never get, or they won't give me, or whatever. But actually, as you say, it's responding and say, okay, if that's the way it is, then you're going to miss out on X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to be able to do this. That's the potential consequence. Are you happy? And if they say
And
yes, move on.
or even better, I like to do it. Okay, so these are your constraints. Are they hard constraints? Like you said, 10 days. Is it really 10, or could it be 11?
Mm.
Like if I could, so okay, so or like if you can start to play
Mm.
to find out what the real constraints are. Okay, fine. So here's what I can deliver in 10 days or whatever. But how about we, I'm just picking 10 as a random bucket of days. But how about we do 5 and then have a chat and see how we're getting on? Because and in my mind, I'm thinking, because your the exec's view, or whoever, might have changed when they start to, because credibility comes through delivery, remember?
Yeah.
And that it doesn't always mean delivery of the end product. It can be that oh my God, this problem statement, like I've never seen anything clear. That you've probably had that before, right? You deliver something that to you or I is just bread and butter, and they're like, oh my, how did you do that? Like we've never.
Yeah.
This is going to be so useful for us. So like get something out early and then say, I know we said 10 days, but look, we did this and you're saying it's going to be really useful. How about we discuss that constraint again, and then just,
Yeah.
again, it's an informed decision based on what they know. A decision isn't always a decision forever. It's a decision at a point in time. And, I think we should get better at having conversations about when is that decided until.
Yeah.
In what situations will that decision be revisited?
Yeah.
Just because someone's pulled an arbitrary deadline out of the air doesn't mean we have to, burn out an entire team to deliver it if that's not the right thing to do. And burning out a team is almost certainly never the right thing to do. It's
Yeah. Yeah, and it's questioning again, isn't it? Really, just and making sure that we're solving the right problem in the right way. You were talking earlier, about the way that these roles are set up in organisations. I mean, I often get a mental picture of like a floor plan in an organisation with cubicles, because it feels like that sometimes, that there are cubicles. If you pop your head up, you can like look over and see everybody, but often our heads are just down and we're getting on within that particular discipline. I often think that it's the same with bodies of knowledge. They're also
yes.
distinct from each other, and almost trying to keep each other at shoulders length and say like we're the most important body of knowledge. And I feel sometimes in all of that we perhaps lose that collaboration that you were talking about earlier, and what I'm transitioning to now is community. And
Yes.
as these niche roles emerge, and they probably all get their own bodies of knowledge that tell them how to do their jobs, which I use the word dilute here quite lightly. I mean, it's going to dilute business analysis to an extent, potentially. How can we retain a sense of community of business analysis across niche disciplines? I feel like that could be quite a challenge.
It could. I don't know the answer to that. But a way I look at it is if we zoom out and think that we are all practitioners of change. It's an ugly, clunky phrase, but but there'll be people saying, "Oh, but we do product. We're product, not change." It's like, yeah, okay, but you're changing, like you're incrementally developing and delivering a product or whatever. But there's still change, right? But we've all got something in common. Like, I don't care particularly. This is just me speaking now. I'm not saying anyone else should think like this. I'm just saying how I think. I don't care what my role title is. I don't care what the clients I work with, what they call my work. I call it business analysis, and I know I bleed into other disciplines, and I think there are enough of us around. And I think I was having this conversation. I think it was with Fabrizio Laguna in Brazil, the Brazilian BA, who, again, anyone listening should definitely follow. And we were chatting about stuff, and I was saying it's interesting because like there always used to be a central hub for stuff, right?
Yeah.
So like, and that had to be there. And I'm going back to I used to live in a windmill time of my life, because the central orchestrating organization controlled information, right? Because you couldn't there was a time when it wasn't as easy to get as much content as we all get now. Certainly wasn't as easy to get, like, for us to do this 30 years ago and get people to listen to it would probably have involved sending audio cassettes out or CDs in the post or something, right? Or maybe so it's that kind of thing. But whereas now that need for a central body to do stuff is, communities can self-organize. So when I was speaking to Fabrizio, this cloudy idea came into my head. It's like we're moving away from like everything orbiting around some central sun to like a constellation of different people and organizations, and and they can all exist and all thrive, but you don't have to be a large organization to do stuff. And and where we place the boundary of that galaxy is largely a social construct, right? You might draw that boundary in a different place to the way you practice business analysis to where I do, but that doesn't matter, because you're doing awesome work for your clients and you're doing the stuff they need, and I'm trying to do the same for mine. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying that I'm not sure how much I don't think the identity matters to people outside of the community anywhere near as much as it does to us inside. And just a crazy analogy to draw there is, I remember being with a relative who'd had a bit of a fall in accident and emergency, so the emergency room of a hospital, and there were all sorts of person visiting this relative who'd taken a fall, all of whom had different titles. And do you know what? As a patient and as a relative of a patient, you just don't care. I don't care whether that person is a nurse practitioner, an advanced nurse practitioner, a doctor, a registrar, a senior registrar, a junior doctor, a radiologist, an orthopedic registrar, or whatever. None of those things. I don't care where those boundaries are. What I want is I want a good clinical outcome for that patient, and I want that community to have decided who needs to do what, when. And do you know what? If an emergency occurs and someone, heaven forbid, has a cardiac arrest or whatever, and the right person isn't there, I probably want the people around to have enough training to deal with it while they get there. And put that into our world, and I know it's a crass analogy, but put that into our world, we're like, oh no, everyone has to care that we're business analysts and we're not whatever. No, it's. I think we sometimes place, and I understand why it's important, but if we focus on actually what clients, customers, stakeholders want and put that first, and worry about the identity second, I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, I think so too. What you said resonates a lot. I've often thought that we often pick up a book that prescribes a particular way of doing our job, and everybody's going about their life wanting some change, and we sort of point at the book and go, no, we're following this. We need to do it this way, and everyone's like, I don't care. I just want this outcome. I want this result, and that's what we need to prioritize here.
I think so, and I think also is knowing that practices change. And I think it was a guy, I forget his name, Simon Wardley, who invented Wardley mapping. Again, really interesting person to look up and follow, puts a lot of his stuff out there for free. And but I remember seeing him speak, and he said, by definition, best practice is past practice. Right? By definition, best practice is past practice. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're in a completely static environment where nothing's changed. And this is me adding on to what Simon said there, where nothing's changed, and but actually sometimes, it's totally fine to mold techniques together, right? We all do it, and it's that dirty secret that, oh, do you know what? This isn't a pure way of using the technique, but it gets the job done, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
And I think that I do think that having toolkits of techniques is really important, but I think we've all got to be constantly looking out. And do you know what? If you see a tool from another discipline that's really useful, maybe we use it in a different way. I would go talk to them and learn about it and bring it in. Right? That's what really excites me, is blurring the edges, bringing stuff in from different worlds and getting our stuff into their worlds. But it comes back to that, the analogy, but knowing that you're mainly Apple, that this is my speciality, and I can do a bit of pear, but go and speak to the pears and the oranges and the other fruits and vegetables are available.
Yeah, they are. You've got a bit more choice. The last thing I just want to pick out from what you said as well is about your constellation, really, and that the profession will continue, the networking of the profession will continue, regardless of the organisations that also exist in the space. And maybe this comes back to what you said before as well, just having people that you can WhatsApp and you know that they'll pick up in a day or two and help you out in the way that you need help.
Absolutely. And I think networking is an underrated skill, and it doesn't have to be terrified. Like I used to be terrified of networking because I find meeting people terrifying. I mean, I just do, right? And particularly in that, if you think about networking, you go to a networking event and everyone's in networking mode. That to me is just like I can do it, but but if you go to an event with BAs, it's like everyone's facing similar challenges. It's not like networking. It's like going to a family reunion or something in many ways. And I've been really fortunate, and I've been able to come to the BA Summit Southern Africa, which is fantastic. And anyone, whether or not you're in Southern Africa, you should go look that up. And I have really great conversations with people, and everyone's friendly. The BA Conference Europe, BA Beyond. There's an event in Germany, of which BA Day. I think there are all these different events and meetups. So like networking inside your organisation is important, but meeting other BAs, not even just in your country. And there's Zoom, that there's the Brussels chapter has a drop-in Zoom call every Friday, and the UK chapter of IIBA does. So networking doesn't have to be scary, but it's great for learning. And you know what? It's one of those things where I found if you network from the perspective of I'm not trying to get anything out of this by networking, but do you know what? If I can help someone out, I will. And if you ever need anything, you almost don't even need to ask. Your network is there. You just sort of put it out on LinkedIn, and people will help you because they know you. Whereas if you haven't networked, then you're kind of shouting at an empty room, because you might have LinkedIn connections, but how many of those LinkedIn connections do you actually know?
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, those are some wonderful last thoughts. Thank you for joining me on the show, Adrian. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for everything that you throw out into the BA constellation. I think you expand the boundaries of the universe, and I appreciate that.
Well, no, I do. One thing, I actually, to do a cheeky little plug,
You do a plug.
is BA Digest. If you go to badigest.link, quarterly open access journal that is now, well, magazine rather than journal, which is completely free. All of the past editions are completely free. You don't have to register, and it's out every quarter. It's technically indexed by the British Library now. So it has an ISSN number, which is more impressive than it sounds, or less impressive than it sounds. But but that again was one of the things we do with Digest, is try and get different perspectives on business analysis. So if anyone listening wants to write an article, get in touch. There's absolutely the opportunity for that as well.